Welcome. My name is Scott Woodgate, and I'm a lead product manager on the BizTalk server team. In this session, we're going to build our first business process. Our BizTalk Server 2004, of course, which is built on the .NET framework and is hosted inside Visual Studio.net. It provides an environment for us to build business processes that link together web services, as well as legacy applications and your line of business applications. So in this demonstration, we will first build a business process, and I'll show you the steps involved in doing that inside Visual Studio. Once we've built a business process, we'll make it available as a web service. And once it's available as a web service, we really want to call it by some client. So in this example, what we'll do is we'll take advantage of InfoPath from the Office server system to call our web service. So that's a brief overview of the demo that you're going to see today. Let's just get straight into it. So here we are, we've opened up Visual Studio, and inside Visual Studio you can see a BizTalk server project. I've gone ahead and created a new BizTalk server project. As you can see, it opens up with a set of references to a variety of assemblies that BizTalk server uses, system.xml and so on. And now what I want to do is add the various artifacts into my BizTalk project for my business process. So if we go here and add an existing item, I've already done some work to create some schemas and some maps that we're going to leverage in my business process. I'll show you the editors for those in a second, but let's just go ahead and import those schemas into my project. Visual Studio will automatically pick up those schemas and maps and put them into your BizTalk project. So let's have a look at them one by one in the various editors that ship with BizTalk Server. First, we have this client request schema. My goal in this project is to enable my customers to submit requests for appraisal of, for example, jewelry. So maybe my wife has a ring or a bracelet and I want to get insurance on that item. So what I want to have happen here is the customer to enter in some information like the appraisal value, how much that item is worth, what their address is, what their name is, and then how much coverage they need. So to really facilitate that, I've taken advantage of the BizTalk editor, which enables me to model schemas using the standard W3C XML schema language. So here you can see I have a client request schema. This client request is the root node of the schema. And then over here in properties, you can see I have a variety of properties that are available to me. Here is the root node, for example. I can also set things like the content type and so on for each one of the nodes in a schema. To add items with the BizTalk editor, I simply come in here and I can add elements or attributes. I can add sequences and choices. And this tool really gives me the ability to model all of the W3C XML schema, but in a simple to use way such that it's rendered in this tree diagram. Those of you who have used the Visual Studio.net built-in XML editor are probably curious what's the difference between this one and the built-in editor. This editor is more targeted at creating documents. The built-in editor is more targeted at relationships from a data or a database perspective. So I've gone ahead here and I've modeled my schema. Let's go back to the Solution Explorer. In this case, the schema that is submitted from the client is a little different, and only a little different, from what the company is going to respond with. You can see here that the company is going to respond to my appraisal with reflecting my address information, but also including some information such as what was the coverage requested, the appraisal value, and so on. And notice, of course, in the editor, we get the ability to take advantage of data types. So here you have the full myriad of W3C XML data types available to you. In this simple case, I'm just using a string data type for this field. And then in this window here, if I just expand that out, you get to view the entire schema that you're creating in the editor. You can see how we model the XML using complex types and elements. So here is the element for the requested coverage. So in this example, I've created a client request and I've created a company response. The client submits using the client request, the company responds using the company request. And one of the key things I need to do is handle the differences between those two data formats. So if I go ahead and open this map, which I've already created, that map will open directly inside the BizTalk mapping tool. And in the mapping tool, I have the ability to take a source schema, see my source schema as a client request, and a target schema, and map those two target schemas together. Let's just demonstrate that. If I go ahead and select my company request as my target schema, it gets imported directly into the mapping tool. If I go and select my toolbox, in the same paradigm as creating a Win form or another type of application like an ASP.NET application, I have a set of controls over here that I can drop into my map to make mapping easy. Because in some cases it's really simple to map different types of data. For example, the appraisal value field I just want to copy from my source to my target. But in other cases, maybe I need to do some additional work. So for example, I'm going to use this uppercase functoid, drop that in, and connect the name field on my source schema to the name field on my destination schema, because maybe in the destination I'm routing this to a legacy system that expects information in uppercase. This mapping surface is enabling me to create XSLT when I do this work, and as well as just plain XSLT. Of course, the new version of BizTalk Server is built on top of the .NET framework, so if I like, I can drag in a scripting component, and using that scripting component, if I go and have a look at the properties and configure that script, I then get access to any external assembly. So if I've already written some code in VB or C# or any of my favorite .NET languages, I can refer to that directly inside a functoid, or if I like, I can just start typing in here with some inline code. So here is a little example of a concatenate function, which is a little bit of inline C#. It accepts two inputs from the left-hand schema and outputs into the right-hand schema. So one of the beauties of this environment is, yes, you get a graphical toolset, but as well as that, at any time you can go out to your favorite .NET-based programming language to supplement that. Or if you like, you can just simply inline XSLT. So here I can see I can inline some XSLT inside my graphical tool. One of the key things we've tried to do here in BizTalk Server 2004 somewhat successfully is really give you a set of powerful tools, but at the same time give you the ability to exit out to code wherever appropriate in your solutions. So let's go back to the Solution Explorer. I've created these maps, I've created these schemas. Let's create a simple business process and just take you through the concepts of using this business process. I add a new item. My item is a BizTalk orchestration. I give it a name. The myfirst.odx will be the name added to my solution, and ODX is an orchestration file. And we open up the BizTalk orchestration surface and toolbox. You can see the toolboxes have changed, and also we have an orchestration view over in the right. Let's just start off by really modeling a simple orchestration. First, I'm going to receive that appraisal document from my client, and at some point later I'm going to send back as the company the result from my appraisal. So first I receive a request from my client, secondly I return back the response. So that's a good starting point. How do I receive messages into a BizTalk orchestration? The way you do that is through the notion of a port. Ports on this port surface, and I just dragged in the port configuration wizard, are modeled on WSDL, just like web services. So what we're really modeling here is the interface into a business process. So when that client submits an appraisal message, this is describing how it submits the appraisal message into BizTalk Server. So I'm going to call this the client request port, and we'll press next. A client request is already used in my project, so let's call it the client request port. And BizTalk Server is built fundamentally on the same programming concepts that you'll be familiar with in VB or any procedural language. So in this orchestration environment, you'll see a lot of port and port type, message and message type. That is, entities and types for entities. Just like in VB, you have I is an integer, where I is an instance and the type of I is an integer. In the orchestration environment, you have the same thing. Port is an instance, or in fact the port that I just created is an instance, and it's an instance of a port type. And this encourages reuse because you can use the same port types across multiple ports. And in a minute you'll see we'll create messages off message types in a similar paradigm. So for all of you who are used to the standard typing concepts in procedural languages such as VB and C#, this should be pretty familiar to you. So you can see here is our port type. By default we just create an existing port type. I could give it a name, client request port type, and we'll show where it ends up in the UI in a minute. Here is where I can specify my communication pattern. Maybe I want simply the customer to submit the message directly to the business process in a fire and forget asynchronous manner, and it's done. Or maybe what I want to have happen is have the client submit a request to the business process and immediately get a response back in a typical request-response scenario. In fact, that's what I want for this scenario. And over here we have access restrictions. If you're familiar with concepts from classes like friend classes and so on, and this is similar. This means whether or not this port type or port is available to be called. Eventually I want to make access to this port available through a web service, so I'm going to set it up as public so that it can be accessed through a web service. And I get to choose here whether I'll be first receiving information on this port and then sending it, or vice versa. And I can set up some additional information in the port bindings. When I press finish, I have a model of my port here. This port is going to be eventually available as a web service. The client will call the request method with some information. That information will then go into the receive shape. We'll do some work. And then finally, the send shape will then send back a response through this response method to that web service's client. So we've modeled here effectively a port for a web service. Now what we want to do is go ahead and add some messages to this port and connect this shape with this shape. And you can see in the orchestration designer we have something that's pretty similar to smart tags that enables you to really get an idea of what the next step is. If the orchestration designer is saying, okay, you're going to receive a message, but what is that message that you're receiving? So when we click on the message, notice over here in the orchestration view that I have a message appear, and I keep trying to use the same message name, client request. Okay, so I've given my message a name. And once I give my message a name, just in the same way that you have, of course, strong typing in your other .NET languages, inside the orchestration environment, this is a strongly typed environment. So you have to give that message a type. Now the BizTalk orchestration environment supports things like .NET classes. So maybe I'm accepting a message that is of a system.string type or of an integer type. I can do that. But actually in this case, what I want to do is accept a message of the type of the schema that I generated earlier in the BizTalk editor. If you look here, you can see BizTalk Server Project 1 client request. That's the schema I was displaying in the editing environment. It's this schema right here. So what I've done in my orchestration is said, I want to receive at this receive shape a message, this is the message, of a type being specified just here that is the schema. So you can see now I have a strongly typed message. If I go back to my hint, now no longer does it need a message to receive. Now it really wants to know where am I receiving it from, what port. So if I go ahead and drag the request to the receive, I'm now good. So I've set up this port to receive in a new message. Once that new message is received in, I need to do something with it, and then eventually I'm going to send it out. Let's just do the same thing we did with the receive side on the send side before continuing. So on the send side, I need a new message. We'll give my message a name. And if I go back to here, I'll create a new message. Okay, I've got a message which is message 1. And let's go ahead and rename that message to something more meaningful. So we go back to the orchestration view, and we'll give this my C response name. In a similar way, we'll create that message type. And in this case, we'll select the target message, the message that comes back from the company request. So I've now completed the creation of the message and the message type, and also I can now drag in the send message. Now of course we can rename the shapes to something more meaningful. So this is receive appraisal and this is, of course, send response or something like that. Now, in a typical business process, the steps between receiving an appraisal and send a response may be complicated and many. For the purpose of this demo, let's just do something simple. I'm going to drag in a transform shape. What a transform shape does is gives me the ability to construct a message. So if I click here, it'll ask me what message do I want to construct. I want to construct the response message. Okay, this is like dimensioning a new variable in VB. I'm constructing the response message. And once I have selected that I want to construct the response message, I have a transform shape that enables me to take an input message and map that input message to my response message. So if we go ahead and click here, you'll see that it's asking me, so what's the source message? Well, the source message is my request, because I want to take my request information and I want to map that onto my response information. And now, rather than doing an assignment like you would do in VB or C#, I've already created a map that can do that for me, and that map exists in my project, so I'll select it here. So here you can see, here is my client to company request map, and I apply my variable request as my source message and my variable response as my target destination message, and I am good to go. So now I've built a very, very simple business process. And I could get endlessly more complex, as of course I would in any real world requirement. For example, if I go and have a look on the properties of the orchestration, I can take this orchestration and make it transactional. I can go ahead and drop in transactions over portions of the shape. So I'm dragging this scope shape, which is a transaction shape. You can see I can have atomic transactions. These are transactions with automatic rollback, or I can have long running or no transactions. So if I drag an atomic and then I just select my construct shape, I can then go ahead and put that into the atomic scope. And if I like, for each one of my scopes, I can define some compensation, which is work that's done after that scope has failed. And I might define decisions and so on and so on. So you can see here that what I talked you through very quickly was how to build a simple orchestration, and there's a whole rich set of features that you can take advantage of to model effectively a state machine inside this orchestration environment. Once I've completed my business process, I go ahead and build that business process. And when I'm building inside Visual Studio, the picture that you're drawing in the orchestration environment will be compiled down to MSIL, the very same metadata that runs on the .NET framework as VB or C#. And this is a really big improvement in BizTalk Server 2004, as the performance of these business processes is at least 5 times greater than in previous versions of the product. And of course, as you'd expect, the compiled project is compiled into a .NET assembly. So we have a .NET assembly that's put into the GAC and that's executed by the BizTalk engine. The entire orchestration engine is written in C#. In fact, this product has about 1.6 million lines of C# code in it, which makes it probably the biggest application with C# in it on the planet, certainly the largest server application shipping from Microsoft. Okay, great. I've built my business process. I've got this port here that's willing to accept a message on a web service. I need to make that port available as a web service. How do I do that? The way I do that is use the BizTalk Web Services Publishing Wizard. This will take the business process and create an ASP.NET based proxy that will sit in front of the business process so that I can interact with it through web services. You can see here I publish my orchestration as a web service. Please select the name of my BizTalk assembly. When I press next, the wizard interrogates the assembly. See this port here? This is the port that I want to make available as the web service modeled inside the orchestration designer. I press next, and then I go ahead and complete this wizard by doing things like adding support for SOAP headers if I like, providing a name for the proxy that I'm creating, my web service proxy, maybe automatically enabling anonymous access because I'm a developer. Probably wouldn't want to do that in a production environment. Maybe creating BizTalk receive locations. Next and finished. Once this web service is completed, it creates an ASP.NET project in the directory I've specified underneath
IIS. And if I bring up Internet Explorer, then I can browse directly to the URL of that exposed web service. So what I've done here is run the wizard and gone ahead and browsed an IE to the web service page. You can see here that my web service has one operation available to it, operation 1. That's the operation just here. See that operation _1? That's what that means. And of course I could have used a pretty name for that to make that more accessible to my customers. And when I click on operation 1, we'll of course expose the WSDL for the web service. Here you can see the client request. That was that schema that we modeled in the BizTalk editor, and that's the message type that we're receiving through the port and doing some work on it, transforming it. And then over here you can see here is the company response, which is the second schema that we modeled in the BizTalk editor. So all of that's been available to us through WSDL. So let's go ahead and really demonstrate this in terms of using it. To consume this web service, for the simple example of bringing up here InfoPath, which is a new application from Office, makes it really easy to interact with web services through BizTalk Server. So I select web service. In this case, in InfoPath, I select receive data, and that's InfoPath speak for a request response web service that you want to attach to. I'm going to put in the URL for my web service. Let me go into Internet Explorer, copy that URL in, okay, and we'll just get rid of the bit at the ends. InfoPath then queries that BizTalk web service and displays, just like Internet Explorer did, the first operation. Here's operation 1, and then I click finish to complete. Now I'm in a design mode where I'm designing my form to sit in front of BizTalk Server. It's probably more useful for you to go to listen to some of the good content there is on InfoPath to understand in many more details how to build these forms. But in short, there is a set of query fields and data fields that represent the requests and the responses to this web service. I simply drag those onto the form and do some work to give this form a name, and if I could spell, that would be very useful. Let's do it like that. And then subsequently I can make this form look pretty, because as a developer, artistic design is definitely not one of my strong points, although it may be one of yours. I subsequently preview the form and I am ready to go. So you can see here that in preview mode I have my initial appraisal form. I enter in a value like $1,000. I enter in a street address, and I enter in a city information. Notice because I'm using InfoPath, I'm getting things like full spell checking on the names of streets and so on if I wanted, the name of the person, and the value of the item. This is a $1,000 item. I want it fully covered. So this is my appraisal form that I want to have sent back to the business process that is available here. It will first receive that, do some business logic, in our case a simple transformation, but in a real scenario it would do a whole lot of work, maybe access some back-end systems, look up some credit information and so on, and then send back a response. So let's go ahead and run it. It's as simple as clicking on this Run Query button. The information in InfoPath as XML is then submitted through to the business process that gets put onto the orchestration at the BizTalk server end, and the response is then sent back to InfoPath down here. Okay, so we went ahead and filled in the information in the appraisal form, pressed Run Query. BizTalk server picked up that message through a web service, put it into the transformation logic, and sent it back to the same caller. And here you can see here's my response directly inside InfoPath. And if we run that again, you'll see the latency of this is pretty good. It's almost instantaneous in terms of how quickly it responds for a single caller. So what you've seen here is a very simple example of how you can take advantage of the skills you already know in terms of Visual Studio.net. You can also include your own custom code, C# or VB code, directly inside your business processes, and then making those business processes available as web services, and finally connect those web services to clients such as InfoPath.
So what you've seen in this brief snippet is how you can first create a business process directly inside Visual Studio.net using BizTalk Server's orchestration technologies built on the .NET framework. Then once you've created that business process, how you can make it available as a web service, and then call that web service from a client, which is InfoPath. What you've seen in this segment is just a tiny portion of the capabilities that are available through BizTalk Server 2004. I definitely encourage you to go look at the webcasts, the MSDN webcasts, for many more detailed sessions on BizTalk Server 2004. And of course, feel free to hang out and look at my blog, which is on blogs.msdn.com. Cheers.